Um, Thank you very much, Tom, for inviting me this year to Urban Islands workshop. I'm really enjoying it, and I hope my students as well as thank you to Sydney Uni for having us here to work all this during these 2 weeks. I would like to present briefly my work. I've started as an archaeological photographer many years ago, almost 20 years ago, and I photographed mostly in the Mediterranean, based in Greece, but I would photograph in Turkey, in central Turkey, in France, in UK, Italy, for special requests by archaeologists, usually German archaeologists, for funeral painting. So my work would be to photograph under-earth graves and archaeological sites, which after 12 years determined my work as an architectural photographer. So from here, yeah. Since I was a little girl, I was born in Israel. I grew up in Istanbul, I moved to Greece, and then London, and the rest of the world, now New York. I was obsessed with the periphery of the world and the edges of the world, almost in a very obsessed, like everyday thinking, hanging around with geography books and geology without even understanding, without even knowing how to read sometimes. So for me, in my early ages, the periphery of the world would be this, where I come from, actually, Northern Africa, Middle East, and Turkey, Greece. When I started, when I moved to Istanbul at the age of 4, I used to follow my grandparents and my grandmother, who would take me around the cemeteries all the time. You know, we all have our obsessions, and she had her own, which determined my way of seeing and the way I photograph nowadays architecture. So this is the work of Araguler, a very important Turkish photographer, Magnum, and these are the sites where I used to photograph as a student, undergrad student in photography, leaving from Athens by bus going to Istanbul. These were also the sites in Greece where were actually my material sites for even my master's degree at Goldsmiths in University of London, many years later. I was an archaeological photographer at the Ministry of Culture, but in the same time I would use these sites as my material as a fine art photographer and landscape photographer. Since my early 20s, my interest was about vegetation and limits, borders of cities, and as it is in a castle, where castles many times representing the borders. So I would photograph ruins. This is a picture I've made when I was 23, remains of buildings in relation to vegetation. And actually this plant, after 10 years, was my thesis for my master's at Goldsmiths, which was used in funerals in antiquities. In my mid-20s, I would go to Anatolia, where I was photographing completely isolated landscapes, and my inspiration would be always from futuristic films and images of NASA about Mars and similar sites from the moon. At that time, we didn't have Mars, but it's always related to me. So this was the first image that I presented to Bernard Tschumi when I was with Fulbright Foundation. I spent a year as an artist at Columbia University, and that was the first image I showed to Bernard Tschumi, which made me enter the world of Columbia University, in which I am since the year 2000. When I saw him this year in a very important event organized by Storefront, he gave me a hug saying, "Do you remember all these years ago when you showed me that picture of the desert?" So, yes, I remember it. I spent a year photographing this plant around the deserted, isolated territories of Greece, and also the work of Joseph Sudek, which was a great inspiration to me, a Jewish photographer, Prague-based, who would photograph, again, cemeteries and tombstones, I would call, where they were, for me, a very important material, referring also to architectural elements, architecture as a remain, architecture as a trace. For me, the very important, when I switched to contemporary architecture, for me, the very important aspects were architecture dissolving into landscape. Immateriality, illusion of depth, reflected transparency, darkness, liminality, marginality, which I explored for many years working in Japan and elsewhere around the world, recording glass buildings, but not in an expected commercial way. I started with this work, which determined my career as an architectural photographer, without even having any opinion about what contemporary architecture is. But I was hanging around at Columbia University, actually at Avery Library, my first month when I arrived in New York. I saw this building and I said, I have to find this architect. I don't know who he is, but I have to find him. So I went all the way to Japan to talk to Kengo Kuma. It was when he had only 7 people in his office. At the moment, he has 200 people. And I was very lucky because he accepted me and I said, I want to photograph for you. And since then, we are still working together. So I'm very much interested for this moment of light where the way architecture dissolves into landscape and you actually read the landscape and architecture becomes part of it. And his book, Anti-Object, is my really material inspiration. I mean, I read this book many years later from the first moment I met him, but that's why I realized why we keep on working together all these years. And the importance of materials in architecture and the exploration of what the material does in the way you experience architecture as a photographer, how you capture this. That's the key point from my point of view as a photographer, as it is here in the work of Bernard Tschumi. The New Acropolis Museum, where I spent a week photographing it. And I wouldn't go for what the magazines and commercial publications would expect. And actually, I was presented at Bauwelt, one of the best magazines, theoretical magazines in Europe, which is German-based Sky Cable, where I had an interview together with 2 other photographers about the museum. So for me, the important element here is to bring out the Parthenon and the rock, and how the nature and the monument is related to the contemporary. Again, photographing the work of Smiljan Radic in Chile, my priority, who is a very difficult person, very complicated, very intense, moody. For me, to photograph this work in Papudo in Chile and emphasizing on the vegetation and cactus and showing him these images, I wouldn't know how he would react really, but his reaction was so good that we are still working since then. And so for my students, the Island of the Dead. This painting is by Arnold Böcklin, the Swiss painter. It has been a serious material for inspiration, and his 5 versions of this painting and how he captures and interprets what happens in relation to the landscape with the light, and that's what I'm trying to explore in my photography with these little details that usually photographers in architecture would ignore, or we would think of we have to switch on all the lights to photograph a building, or we have to do this and that following rules. But actually, I'm not searching for these rules at all, but whatever appeals to me in relation to my references, this is major, as well as the work of Richard Mishra, the American photographer, and preferably his work in the Southwest, in the desert of US, and his night photographs, as well as the photographer, the German photographer Axel Hütte, where this picture has really has been a very important element for me. So it's this idea of photographing landscape, and at some point I try to show, not try, but somehow architecture is somewhere there, but basically what I photograph is the landscape, which is my obsession since I was a long-distance runner, since my early ages. This little saying of Tadawando is also something which has, I remember when I first saw his work in 2001 in Kyoto, I wouldn't believe that this can be designed by a human being. It was a very intense moment for me, shaking moment. I use elements of natural elements in terms of light. Of course, in here I needed to have the lights on, but also the full moon, where it would lead me to an hour and a half to photograph without knowing what will happen in here. But actually, even within this darkness, you talk about the landscape and maybe very little what architecture is about. And again, this kind of isolation and landscape and the importance of long exposure in my photography, which is the result of working with 4x5 inches camera. So again, here the work of the Spanish office RCR. When I was there in past November, when I arrived to this site, as I presented briefly a week ago in this 5-10-minute presentation, I was fascinated by the vegetation and the forest land around, and how this object, which stops to be an object, is part of all this kind of jungle scenario. As well as in here in Bernard Tschirmi's Learner Hall, and having all these glass ramps and all this material and all the previous publications that I'd seen about this work, which is not considered within his best, but I was actually very inspired how the interior is related to the exterior, and that was my first building to photograph in the United States in the year 2001, which gave me the opportunity to publish my first book in US with a Berlin-based publisher. Deborah's work, when I was very young, used to be my inspiration material as well, in terms of these layers, transparency and not transparency, seeing things through different layers. But I didn't know at those years when I was young how to reach this. I didn't want to use artificial ways, but I like the direct. I'm a perfectionist in photography, that's why I use the 4x5 inches camera. So I managed with my 4x5 camera to gain such a result. And, very important, another element is the choice for remoteness. The quality of light, what is the difference of the light in Scandinavia from Australia, for example, from Central Europe, different types of terrains, archaeology, isolation, climatic variations, and vegetation. These are the elements that really drive me to run around the world, because it's about running. And Magdalena Jetelova's work, when I first saw it in my early 20s, was very inspiring to me. This is again from my desert series in Anatolia. So I work with a lab based in London, and wherever I photograph, I use still films. I send all the films. Everything leads to London by courier. So whatever I do is DHL or FedEx, it doesn't matter, but it arrives in London, and from there I communicate through email, Skype, or whatever, and I receive the images and then I send them around. Working in the desert, this idea of remoteness, which always attracted me since I was a long-distance runner, and I'm still running when I'm in New York mostly, because elsewhere I don't have really much time. And a choice of a work which made me exist and breathe and work and see, have all my senses alive, from northern part of Iceland to the ice desert of Norway, northern in the Arctic, and then the Brazilian desert. Again in the Arctic, the work of Stephen Hall, where later on I would realize the references and this idea of architecture as a ruin, as I worked so many years in archaeology, and using archaeology somehow as a kind of inspiration always in the way I see architecture, contemporary architecture, as well as the vegetation, the relation of the inside to the outside, long exposures, and the importance of the landscape again. A house in Sao Paulo, designed by Marcos Acayaba, and again being in his in this marble table, where even from each choice of a material for the interior, I will try to reflect and bring in the landscape. The importance of the light and what the light does in the reading and the experience of architecture. How different these pictures would have been in a different moment of the day, and how you read really the materials, but also how do you exist there in architecture. Architecture is made for living, for existing and breathing with. It's not just an object. The physicality which is involved in my work, as I said, the large format camera, working through unfamiliar landscapes and different types of weather conditions to calculate parameters for work, embarking, disembarking. I have no home, that's a choice. I live in hotels, in anywhere, it doesn't really matter as long as I do my work. It's a continuous journey within a journey, navigating remote terrain using variable and sometimes unorthodox modes of transport. Oscillating between hemispheres and time zones to capture particular examples of conditions and particular sites, excavation of the essence of place through lengthy engagement with the habitual. So that's where I was spending my time when I was in Athens as a teenager, running. That was my training, up and down the stairs, and also in forests. That's why now in photography I have no problem to run anywhere carrying the camera. It's like a training for me. This is a picture of mine just 3 years ago when I was on foot crossing from Chile to Argentina. And when I entered the borders, the people in the border said, "Where is your car?" I said, "I have no car. I just arrived." And so, you know, one of my great moments. This is another remote area in the borders of Argentina to Chile, and this fascination of being just at the edge of things, because that's the way I translate it in my mind. That's what fascinates me and takes me around. As well as here, again, this relation of the interior to the exterior, but again, insisting on the fascination of the landscape when you are in the building. The work of Kengo Kuma, the latest book, the latest work actually, which will be made a book. The work of Matthias Klotz, where my priority here is just the bush and this kind of isolation instead of revealing it as a super villa belonging to a billionaire. Another house in Iceland, in northern part of Iceland, where again, from Studio Granda, the way architecture dissolves in the landscape, and finally, it's all about the landscape. The same here with the work of Riken Yamamoto. In Atacama Desert, again, my background as an archaeological photographer influencing me to see things, remains, always seeing remains when it's just about rock formations, and seeing the stones as materials for architecture, and the different types of light, as we will see here, is the light in Andes and the light in the Arctic at 1 a.m. in the morning, with a long exposure in freezing cold conditions. Again, the different territories and hemispheres and Latin America and the Arctic, the water, the waterfall, and how it reads, and yeah, me photographing and being on the road always. So my next project right now, something that is an ongoing project, is the glass wood house by Ken Kuma. The idea is to photograph it in different seasons, and this transition of nature and what is the experience of the landscape from this transparent place. I wouldn't call it either object. It's not an object for me anymore here. So we will be working with Kenya Hara and Kengo Kuma, John Ockman, Yohani Palasma, and Haji Kans will be the publisher. My inspiration arrived from the French photographer Jean-Luc Tartarin. It was a book I bought 2 years ago, and it was photographing the forest in different seasons. And when I arrived to this site just a few months ago, I mean in heavy winter, in the fall actually, in New York, in New Canaan from New York, I just recalled this book and I said, that's not a photo shooting which will take place just for once. It's a whole story going on. And that's the story which will lead us working all together as a great team. And that's my work that I'm trying to do here as a researcher in Australia, exploring contemporary architecture, Australian architecture, and that's a research and photographic material that I'm preparing again for a very important publication, which will be published by the Berlin-based Haji Kans. And RMIT is the one who is supporting me for this, and I'm very happy to be working with Martin Hook. And I hope this will lead me to a very interesting presentations and exhibitions around the world, also revealing the relation of architecture, Australian architecture, with Chilean architecture and Norwegian. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I guess the first thing that we have to do is apologize for not fulfilling the dressing code. We were supposed to work on the island today, but we didn't sign on time the forms, and not that I really care a lot about dressing code, but Clara does more. One Saturday, I was already dressed and ready to go out of the apartment, and Clara told me, if you're going to be like that, I'm not going to leave the apartment with you. So since then, I'm trying to be better.
This is about architecture. Can you behave?
So let me explain. We're all friends. We already know each other. So let us explain a little bit the conditions in which we work and why we do our work in the way we do it. First of all, we are a couple, and that means that we are not, we always have a dialogue, and we always contrast our ideas. The second part is that we actively work in two different contexts. And this is not the typical bullshit that someone presents that I have been working all over the place. For the last 10 years, we at least have 5 construction sites active in each side of the Atlantic. So that means that we need to understand the rules. So this is a cardiogram of the different conditions that you will find in each side of the Atlantic in the context in which we work. And this is a list of plans for a house in Spain. And this is a list of plans for a house in Mexico. Both of them with exactly the same architectural quality. Good or bad, I'm not saying anything, but it's the same. The second part of it is that we rely a lot on technology, but not like cool technology, but WhatsApp and my finger. So whenever there's nothing really good, we get pictures every day, and it's like, no, that's wrong, fix it, and then they will send it. So we are used to work with this, and this also means a system of work and trust. You cannot, it's a system in which it's not the American system in which you sign and sign and sign contracts trying to avoid to be sued. It's a system in which you make sure that you're not going to get sued by collaborating with the contractors and with everybody. That's a structural document explaining. I was having a meeting in Mexico with the engineer, and I was sending WhatsApp photos to Clara of what the things had to be changed. Construction system, very different. In the left is a Mexico project, and in the right hand is a Spanish project. One is very labor intensive. The other one is more technological. And the problem is, how can we approach these two different places in which we work with the same strategy? So in the top part, there's like the genius approach, that's me, yes, of course. And a genius might, even though it's not actually like me, it was the type of guy that will work all the way in, but we don't do a croquis in a napkin or anything. We spend the same amount of time for all the phases of the project, conceptual design, construction documents, and everything. So half of the construction documents are drawn by us, and half of them by a couple of guys in the office. We're a very small office. And then, since we're a couple, we have kids. And that means that we need to be very efficient, that we cannot, that we need to focus our energy in certain projects. We're not almost allowed by Malena and Bruno to do competitions, because that requires another type of time. And you take them to the construction, to choose marbles, then you put them in the motorcycle of the engineer. Then Clara ends up carrying them and at the same time that you're choosing and how to cut the marble. Or at the end, you just give them to the client, and tell them like, if you want your house to be in the right location, either you take care of them or, we don't respond. And this is important because we always, I was a boxer, like an Olympic boxer when I was, amateur boxer, when I was young. And the thing, a boxer never is all the time throwing punches. It's just throwing punches to keep distance. And then whenever he finds the right objective, then boom, he pushes hard. And I think that's one thing that we do. And then I think that it's good to tell the students, like, sometimes you need to concentrate your energy in the things that you can know, that you know that you will get a good result. And then whenever you find the right place, then you do the punch.
We work in different scales. The office, I would say it's a conventional office. We're a very small office. But we work in different scales and like to do so. We like very small scale and very big scale, and we're kind of proud of that. However, instead of going through those scales in a boring presentation or just like, here's my project here, A, B, C, D, there's kind of a few topics that we're interested on, and maybe it's going to be a boring presentation anyway, but let's try to just go through those topics. The threshold. In the last 20 years, I would say there's been a clear discussion in academia and so on about thresholds, and it's clear that a threshold needs to be in a space that it's both architectural and non-architectural. So basically, and just going back to the way we understand it, we understand that that a threshold is basically within that line that separates inside from outside. It's basically a space that we can inhabit, and within that space, that we can actually inhabit within inside and outside, plenty things can happen. This is a house in Mexico, in the Pacific coast of Mexico, in Puerto Escondido. And here you have a section of the house where you can see this threshold space that it's connecting the outside space next to a swimming pool to the other outdoor space on the top of the house, which is looking for the views to the sea, which is on the north facade. Basically, this space that it's continuous, it's the main space of the house, and the space that it's more inhabited is the space that it's between the inside and the outside. This shape actually becomes the shape of the house, the actual form of the house itself. It exposes as a facade. And we see here how this interior space, which contains the living room and the dining room, is basically part of this threshold that I was speaking about. And it comes up all the way up, getting to this space that it's fully connected with the outdoors. You've seen this one project that I was talking before in Puerto Escondido, where the section was exposing the exploration for the threshold in a project that we just finished 1 month or maybe 1 month and a half ago. The threshold is exposed to a permeable skin where this threshold becomes completely contaminated by the conditions in the exterior. So the skin is not anymore a continuous skin, it's about a skin that can be porous. And at the end, it gets completely connected to the verticality of there's a tower within it, so it gets completely connected with that. In Tepoztlán, also in Mexico, within an amazing site that we were super lucky to intervene, we were asked to do a small lounge. And that lounge basically started from the definition of a program, three different uses that were intentionally separated to build up this threshold in plan. The main space here was decided from the very beginning in plan to be the protagonist of the space. And the indoor spaces, the small boxes that were around it, were deliberately small and contained. Of course, the negotiation between landscape and architecture was necessary since we were exposing ourselves to the limit. But that's easy to say, but not so easy to construct. But however, it took a while to know how, but we were able to do it. And we finally built up this small base at the edge of the trees, and that was separating the more livable space from the outer space. Constructing these contained spaces that were juxtaposed to the vegetation within them, clearly drawing the limit of these contained spaces while exposing the fluidity of the other spaces and drawing the limit. When we talk about urban spaces, this threshold still stands up. For us, they asked us when there was a competition, and the idea was to revitalize a city in Murcia, in the south of Spain. And instead of going for an intervention in the center, we actually thought that the best idea would be to kind of program the limit and build up this threshold, a programmed area that would connect the interior with the exterior. This is a paving drawing, and this is this condition of the urbanity and connected with this amazing landscape that existed there that was programmed and incorporated within the design. In another project in Neuchâtel, the waterfront was also understood as a work of limit, of breaking the limit as a line and generating this space that was a threshold again, a continuous space that would lead from urbanity to landscape, building up the program that would break up through a section and kind of generate a continuous line that would go from urbanity to the water in this case, programming it up and coming up with programs that had more to do with urbanity and leading to programs that had to do more with landscape. Sorry.
Just to clarify, the transitions were not our design. This was a Mac presentation, and the small boxes are weird. Two things. We work also because in the condition that we work, but also in what we believe, and maybe with what Erieta was saying before. Now, if you compete to be the most flashy one, you're going to lose, you know. And we don't want to compete either. But we're more interested in how can you simplify things and find the richness and the sublime by simplifying your architecture. So I think we ended up working with, a common thing in our work is that we ended up working with solids, like very clear solids, and very clear voids. And that is not just, then it's because I think it's part of the strategy of the projects in which we try to incorporate. Sam was referring in his presentation of his book of the incorporation of the exterior space and how can you appropriate the exterior space for your space. So we try to do that in most of the projects that we work, either to use the urban space if you're able to design your project in a way that almost privatize the air, that it's there because nobody's using it, and if nobody affects the view, that space you can merge it and bring it to the project. And then if the landscape is there, so try to bring the landscape to the project. This is a house that we did for an Australian lawyer in the International Court of Justice. She was in the news, I think, because she was the lawyer of Gaddafi's son as part of the International Court of Justice, and she was kidnapped with Gaddafi's son for a month and a half, and the prime minister and the foreign immigration system was trying to liberate her, and she was liberated at the end. But there was a moment in which the owner sent us an email saying, like, we knew that there was a missing piece of paper for the permits. We are already under construction. The city gave all the permits, but the house was kind of illegal. And then we were about to send him an email like, you know what, your house is illegal. And then he sent an email like, sorry that I didn't respond the answers, but Mel, my wife, is kidnapped for the last 3 weeks. So we said like, we're not gonna tell him anything, you know. At the end, everything went okay. But the project was about. It's in this amazing place. That's the Cap de Creus, one of the best places in the world. And Dali has a house used to have a house in the other side of the mountain, and there's a museum now. But that's a national park. But what we want to say is like, let's not just create one view or one frame of the space, but let's enjoy the different spaces that we can create within. So that was transforming a house that was almost done out of just cubes that will appropriate different spaces. One part of the house was completely open and getting different views of the Mediterranean Sea, and the other one was really close, trying to concentrate the views on the water and isolating the house from the neighbors. Clara is working in there. We have the lock that we have slept in all the houses that we have designed. We have good relationship with the client. We finish a house and well, I will tell the story later if it's, but this is the view of the, so these are international waters. That's Spain. And then in the left part of it is France. So because it's right in the border. So the idea is that in a certain moment you have all these rooms with different spaces and different interactions with the landscape, but at the same time, there are certain moments in which you can enjoy all of them at the same time. In a total different context, but with the same strategy, is the X house, and the X house, because that's the footprint of the house, so of course the name. It was a place in which all the houses used to have that strategy, like facing the street and then facing the valley and the water. So one part of it will be nice and the other one part of it will not be nice. But then we thought about a cross to have views in all the directions. But then we had a tree on the side. So what we decided to do is to rotate that cross, and we ended up having an X because it was the only way to make it fit on the side. But then we realized that opened the possibilities of having amazing patios for each of these conditions, and then having the same quality of views for all the spaces in the room of the house. So the back spaces were having the same quality of view and light as the frontal spaces. So one axis of the house is facing the Mediterranean Sea, and the other axis of the house is facing the Cabrils Valley. These are the plans, because Clara said that in any architectural presentation, plans should be there. and this is the house. The house is floating on a very steep side. Again, one side of it is completely closed, and one side is completely open. The house concentrates the energy towards the Cabrils Valley, and then closes whatever is not perfect in terms of conditions. It's at the end a very simple house. We really enjoy its relationship with the landscape. And then the only point in which it's completely open is the roof, that becomes a wood terrace. And finally, in this section, this is a project that we have under construction. It's again the same strategy, a frame to have a relationship with the landscape, huge terraces. So half of the project, these will have 5-meter terraces, open completely to the landscape, so that the idea is that the landscape will get into the project and not compete with it. I mean, just look at the size of that tree. It's like 50 meters tall. So there's no way even to compete with this black concrete on the exterior and normal concrete in the interior. And the relationship with the site, it's a very simple and direct one.
The discussion on representation, I think it's been long. It's okay. It's been standing here for long, standing in academia and so on, and it's clear how representation has to do with the types of building that we all build. Peter Eisenman, Pier Vittorio Aureli, but also like at Atelier Bobo with Tsukamoto, but probably if we went to like Getty, FOA, like we could go for ages. But we're interested probably in like this image in Escher, how perspective can actually be triggered. And I think that the best exponent for that would be probably the Palazzo Spada of Borromini with the trompe-l'œil, where just trying to make the building bigger, he would just drew through the perspective and had everyone think that it was actually the actual building. Or even more that, which the section and the plan of the small chapel where Borromini actually forces the view of the perspective when you walk through it, so the section goes like adapts to the view of the person, both in section and in plan. In the same way, we believe that we can force the reading of the perception when we work. And we, as I was saying before, we work in different scales. We like doing installations, we like doing exhibitions, and here's an installation for a quite famous Spanish artist called Susana Solano, where we forced this reading of her very small paintings, just by suspending this box from a very straightforward structure that would just get you to this whitish, extreme line of light. That at some other points, depending on the room, would generate a little plaza. In other cases, we've worked with other materials, with cardboard, again, playing with light and repetition of elements, and generating spaces within that. Here, in a completely different budget and in a completely different project, working with pictures that were printed into canvas, and just with light and that canvas, we were able to build up this consequent rhythm that would just reinforce the lineality of the space that was pretty small. And in the same space, and I'm gonna keep going, we generated this other relation of spaces. Basically, this was a project that we had a budget, and suddenly, because of Spanish crisis, I guess that you are all aware, the budget was cut into two, and instead of doing two exhibitions with two half budgets, we decided to do one system that would generate two different kind of spaces. So you saw the two previous things, and then when we were commissioned a third space, and with a really low budget, you just took over the same system and kind of generated a different kind of rhythm. This is a house in the north of Spain, in the Pyrenees. It's in an amazing, we've been really lucky with the site. So it's in this amazing limit between France and Spain, in the top of a mountain. Basically, what the house does is replicate the topography of the space, but mainly what it does is kind of take value of the view to the valley. The house was an existing house, where with an amazing, that we decided to keep just the existing walls, and then there was the view to the valley, but also the view to the rear mountain. So the idea was to kind of generate continuous views to these two conditions by generating a roof that would just enhance that reading. Here's the construction picture. Here is the house already completed, and basically the inner space that has basically the reason of the project, that it's constructing this continuous space. Finally, another ephemeral project in Barcelona, where through perspective we kind of reinforce a budget what it didn't have, just try to reinforce the reading of a size that didn't exist.
Two more chapters very quickly. Urban puzzles. Whenever we work in urban conditions, we try to be way more discreet, because whenever you're dealing with a landscape, squirrels are not going to get offended, I guess. Or, you know, and you can play in a way more playful thing. But whenever you get to a city that there's more noisy, I think you need to be strategic about it. So we try, whenever we work in urban context, now that we are gratefully working now, we try to change the strategy. So this is a building that it's under construction. We kept the original structure, and in reality, we kept most of the building. And we were, the idea, I mean, they would allow us to build almost like a very big building there. But the idea was to keep the good parts of the building that were there. The facade is not, we're not going to touch it. If you walk through it, you will not see it. And just whenever you get to the interior, you will start realizing, for example, these triple high spaces that will be able to change, especially the use of the program. This is another building that it's about to be completed. The red part was the existing house. We kept 95% of it. Then we built with the same strategy, replicating the patio that they had, and then we just put a roof. So at the end, it's a project that from outside, you will never realize that there's a big building in there, even though there is a big building in there. So we have 6 or 7 stories, depending on the area. And the idea was to keep the house, create that white band, and then in contrast with a horizontal line of transparency, and then just have these roofs with a very light composition. We also had here, and this is very important, the commitment of the developer, because any developer will tell you that, you know what, that terrace will need to be built, this building will need to go all the way up. But they understood that the idea was to keep the urban structure and to provide the best conditions for that. This is a building that we are about to submit to the city council. And the important part of it is, I think, the strategic part of it, that it takes the different heights of the urban context, reacts. This is in a very big avenue, so whenever you are working with the avenue, the building gets taller, also because of permits. But whenever you start getting into the area close to the neighborhood, then the building goes smaller and respects the heights and the uses for it. Last chapter.
I'm going to try to be super quick, but basically, as I was saying, scales are important for us, and for that same reason, materials is important as well. This is a site construction in Mexico. We're building again in concrete. We love concrete, like it's been a constant in our career so far, but we like to kind of keep changing the ways we attempt to work with it, and the proceedings that we use. I'm not going to get into details. I think it's like good enough. This is another exhibition that we did in Madrid for the same sculpture I was talking before, the same artist, Susana Solano. And we decided to work with honeycomb paper. The idea was that it would give some transparency, and we basically adapted to the way that the behavior of the paper. The installation was supposed to be really quick. That honeycomb paper is used for the interior of the doors in order to make them solid, more stiff. So we used it.
No, just very quick. That's a door. You know, this is one part of the door. This is what goes in the interior, and this is the other part of the door.
So these doors, standard doors, were just glued to the honeycomb paper, and then we had, in another different set, we had like all the different boxes where the objects were going to be exposed, and we came inside, and then the doors were suspended, and by slowly, it would just like come down and get to build these walls where the boxes would be finally suspended. And by this texture, there was the generation of a little bit of transparency. I think that those were just jewels. We've been lately confronted with some people that wanted a house made out of stone. We've kind of fell immediately in love with that stone. So we're also under construction with this house it's located in an amazing site, and it's exposed to all the conditions of the site, but also all the conditions of our work. Again, like I think that we could also read like kind of all the chapters we've been discussing so far about thresholds, perspective, blah, 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 blah. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Eduardo and Clara. Thank you, Erieta. And particularly thank you, Tom, for inviting me here. I would never have set foot in this part of the world without the invitation. And this is really super great and a really new experience for me, and I'm very happy to be here. And it was actually super amazing to finally meet François Blansiek. If you guys don't know the work of François Blansiek, you guys don't know what a treat you have amongst your faculty. This guy is amazing. I really love his work. Okay, so the structure of which I will talk about the work, I'll break it up into 5 parts with a little introduction. I'll tell really briefly about who I am, what I've done, and I'll break it up into 5 parts. And the 5 parts would primarily be, centered around 5 projects. but instead of talking about the projects or the subsequent, cause and effects of the projects, I'll talk about the motivations behind the projects. So, Jimenez Lai, I currently still live in Chicago. I'm about to move to Los Angeles, which is the first project of what you'll see. And just to give you a little sneak preview, I'm super, super proud of my crew here at the Urban Island crew. They're going to do something, and here's just a little sneak preview of people who haven't slept in days. So I published a book in 2012 called Citizens of No Place. It was published by Princeton Architectural Press with a really generous support from the Graham Foundation. It was really funny because I was just having a conversation with Francois about the desired cover. This is the cover that I was assigned by the graphic design team of Princeton Architectural Press, but this is the cover that I wanted. So, but what this book is really essentially a comic book or a graphic novel. Like I was saying, some of you who were here, I was talking about the desire to reason or to be rational. I think building or the fabrication of building is one thing, but the reason for building is the other. And as people who want to be rational, I guess we want to figure out why we do things. And so to think about why we do things, the motivations that are subjective or the motivations that are coming from the self are stories that one tells. And to me, what better way to tell the story with the language of architects, which is lines and compositions. And so the composition of lines and frames became really natural to me as a way to deliver the thought process of subjective thinking of reasons. And sometimes it got translated into installations, at times really unfortunate, like this one. I really hate this project. It's called Point Clouds. It was at a point in my life when I thought parametricism was interesting, so I had the points floating around and we're pushing it, and it was interactive. And no, the first time I built an installation, I was thinking, yeah, finally I'm gonna build an installation. I'm gonna make sure it's interactive, it glows in the dark, and has points and lines. And other times, the cartoons or the comic books got translated into architectural models or propositions for houses. And sometimes the propositions of houses got translated back into comic or cartoonish architecture, where now we're treating the section of a building as a comic book where we can challenge the notion of typical plans, or we can think about, the episodic nature of lives. Okay, so the 5 parts. Number 1, gravity. Back in 2008, for the first time I did something. It was built in Los Angeles at a place called Materials and Applications. It was a competition, and the title of the competition was Gravity Defiance. At the time, I was thinking, well, what if I made a room that rotates so that the plans become the sections, and the sections becomes the reflected ceiling plans, and it rotated at once an hour, every surface at every 15 minutes interval would become, plans. And every 7.5 minutes, some collisions of social interactions would happen, which I thought was super fun and interesting. But this train of thought really stemmed from, I guess, another research that I was doing at Taliesin. At the time, like any well-meaning young person, I was thinking sprawl is really terrible. And I was studying particularly Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City. And so I was thinking, let's stop sprawling and maybe, put the Broadacre City into a rectangle, inscribe it, and set it free as a spaceship. And the implications of the spaceship to me, I was thinking, well, for the first time, plan sections without gravity, they're all just orthographic projections. And activities could happen on all 4 surfaces. And the very notion of plan section had different functions. So for example, the elevation or the section had more to do with perception with the self, and plans had less to do with perception, but planning or orchestration or scheming. And so the process of thinking about rotation, taking the plan onto 4 sides as it rotates, and as people interact with one another, and also as a way to engage other architectural precedents, like towards new architecture where a case of flat generators, a case of plan as a generator, or a case of section as a generator, and different causes and effects of plan as a generator easily results in a figure that is, difficult to read or uninteresting, where an interesting section where a readable mass becomes a hollow interior with no content. But there to me is definitely a tension about inside and outside as far as the cause and effects of plan as a generator or section as a generator. And the thought of rotation has taken us pretty far recently. We just completed this installation in Toronto where instead of being four-sided, now we're thinking about being five-sided, as in the pitch roof modern house, where you would rotate. If you dissect the house into 5 slices of 45 degrees, and if you rotate it around a bunch of times, what kind of deconstruction can we get, and what kind of oblique surfaces can we get? It was a really good time, and we were in the laneways thinking about rotation. Okay, next, pareidolia. As far as thinking about rotation, and as far as our obsession about orthographic projections, and if we really want to focus on the 4 sides and really needed it to rotate like a clock at once an hour, it means that we were bounded by the axis that would center the rotation. In other words, the Platonic solid that we're dealing with is a cylinder. However, we were approached by a gallery. We started working with them, about. They're like, well, would you want to elaborate more further? So we started elaborating further on this train of thought about rotation and gravity defiance. And we wanted to move on from a cylinder to a sphere. Or in this case, as the sphere evolved into a dual tetrahedron. And the result was this project, the White Elephant, which is a recent acquisition from MoMA. Very lucky that this happened. But there were 3 basic premises to this train of thought of the White Elephant. Number 1, it's hard on the outside, soft on the inside. Again, hard on the outside, soft on the inside is something that I really like about architecture and people and food. Anything that's hard on the outside, soft on the inside, I tend to like. And number 2, it tumbles. It tumbles in like a jack. So the relationship between rotation and triangle became something that we were dealing with. And as it tumbles, I guess I would focus on why it tumbles. Why must it tumble? And this is why I thought it must tumble. In that, as we appropriate the proportion of something that's readable, that has a personality, its relationship with the ground has a relationship with us. And the relationship with the ground that has a relationship with us produces personality. And I'll use this story to quickly, talk about it. So here you see a primitive man stalking a deer. He thinks it through, hugs the deer, and slices the throat open, kills it. But he does not take the flesh. He takes the skin. He feverishly and enthusiastically takes the skin in pieces, and he methodically sews it back together as a cloak, and he covers himself as the first architectural detail, the cladding. He takes the cladding over to the woman that he loves and tells her about his day. I killed a deer, take the skin, sew it back together. Sewed it back together. She has no reaction to anything that he says. And he covered himself under this cloak, abstracting the details of his faces and his body into masses. And that he dances for the person, and the abstraction of his posture becomes a skyline. And so having this study, and so why should we care about posture, or why do we want to know about posture? I would say this is one of the reasons why. It's been 2,000 years that we've been fascinated with posture, I would say, or posture in a way that when we think about the Greek kouros, which is bilaterally stiff, or Michelangelo's David, which performs contrapposto, or Bernini's David, where torque expresses the kind of intensity. Even if we don't see the faces, we're able to tell a body language where, stiffness, relaxed, and intense is being performed. And how does this matter to architecture? And I would say, from the beginning, when we think about columns and the tripartite reading of skyscrapers, it has begun. The process has begun. The transferring of capital to the shaft, to the base, was once made a proposal by Ada Flores in 1922. And I begin to even wonder, why do I like the Seattle Public Library so much as a mass? Perhaps the mass itself is performing contrapostal as a tripartite stacking of parts. And you might wonder, why does posture of architecture matter if the society is being expressed as an abstract sentence that's composed of architecture, and if the skyline itself is a sentence of many characters, that individual architecture help construct the identity of the society? I think that really matters. So therefore, if every sentence itself is saying, I am a city, but I'm not saying anything special, but it's not what you're saying at that point, because the content is a metropolis, but how you're saying it makes each city different. All right, point number 3. I guess I didn't really talk about pareidolia, but it's for another time, I guess, because it's too long, where I talk about cloud watching and faces and things like that. So at one point in my life, I was living in Netherlands, working for this guy, Joep van Lieshout, where I got to live in a shipping container. And it was I assure you, it was really lame, living in a shipping container. It was super cold, and then it was super hot, leaking all the time. And I think my back problems also developed at that point. I also received chemical burns from my hand for working with Joep. But that something remained. I spent about a year or so, the combination of that and Taliesin, spent about a year, almost a year and a half, with only one bag. So the idea of material possession began to disappear from my life, and whenever I got my first full-time job in Chicago, I decided to live in a box and put all of my personal belongings into the box. And so this was the beginning, the briefcase house, where I found a place of 140 square meters and put all of my belongings into the box. But the importance of it is that, the part-to-whole relationship of this interior, that became a poche, and this became the public. So the private and public, but at the same time, too, this is too big to be furniture and too small to be architecture. And therefore, we've been calling this train of thought super furniture. The briefcase house was the first super furniture. Too big to be furniture, and too small to be architecture. Recently, we had the good fortunes of representing Taiwan for the Venice Biennale of 2014. And in it, we were confronted with this context of a historical building of 800 years old. We were not allowed to touch anything, not the wall, not the floor. It's kind of like urban islands in a way. Also, this is a prison too. So here it was. But what we eventually did was, freestanding super furnitures. Freestanding super furnitures, each possessing one single program, or representing one single program. For example, the house of social dining, the house of sleep, the house of study, the house of pleasure. We were thinking the standardization of the modern domestic program makes expectations of domestic diagram really standardized. Anything we want to do, we can't really do it because we're expected to make a 2-bedroom home. And there is not a lot of elaboration to the diagram making, which is why we decided to, I guess, isolate the 9 normal programs of domestic parts and condense them into single buildings that sit within an interior. And so the streets, where the gaps, becomes a way of thinking about interior as urbanism. Not only that, if we like comic books, which we do, does program, or the designation of program, become episodes of a comic book? does the outline of the frame, the outline of the page become the limitations of the plan, and do these programs become, the episodes? And can we reside within the gaps or outside? Can we reside between the gaps or through the frames of the comic book? And these are some of the characters that were introduced. Number 4, Frankenstein. I'm going to try to speed this up. This is André Breton from 1927. André Breton was a poet from Switzerland, right? I don't know. At least he was living in Zurich at the time, and he was, playing this game, Exquisite Corpse, with his friends at the time. I've been also really deeply influenced by a certain Bob Somel. Bob Somel wrote this text, Green Dot 101. In it, he deliberately references this building from Neulings Riedijk Architects, the Bruges Concert Hall in Belgium. The Bruges Concert Hall is a mass that's comprised of 3 masses, but the plastering of the facade renders the 3 masses into a singular mass or a saturated shape. But it got me thinking, why am I more interested in the over-articulation of part-to-part relationship when the part-to-whole relationship can be consolidated into a whole mass? But I'm particularly interested in things that, accentuate the part-to-part relationship, such as the Dutch Pavilion from MVRDV, the Prada Foundation, the roof garden of the Unité d'Habitation, or Villa de Lava, which in itself is a Frankenstein of Villa Savoie with Johnson Glasshouse. The Wall House, this is Chris Burton's Metropolis 2, Andrew Kovacs, Speedism, Francois is here. I mean, I think of these things as, Frankensteins, super amazing. And so if we think about Las Vegas, New York, which is a hotel, and this is a building of 20 different facades, I'm really curious, how can we do that? Or in plan, can we think about 20 different plans that comprises of whole, where the part-to-whole relationship is made up of bricks with characters. We're really fortunate to have been commissioned by the Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York. Our close ally, Eva Frank, asked us to make this project for the occasion of the 30th anniversary of Storefront for Art and Architecture last fall. The premise was to make a giant furniture that can house 99 people. 99 people for one furniture. And so we took the footprint of the storefront, which is a trapezoid, and decomposed it, which is why I was talking about clouds and rainbows. So when we first did it, and as we took the trapezoid and exploded it, there was this really strange invitation to a lot of different characters that just showed up, like these people. And individually, as we cladded them, which was all fabricated by this gentleman right here, Reeves Rash, who also fabricated the white elephant for us. If you need a fabricator, hire Reeves Rash. He's the best. And to me, this was a really beautiful moment for Eva Kiln Park, Sarah Herda, and Joseph Grandma to be sitting together to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Storefront for Art and Architecture. But that's the question. This is Enzo Mari. Enzo Mari versus, I guess, oh shit, I guess I didn't put Gregor in there, but Enzo Mari, if the brick wants to be something, if I accidentally quote Lucan, if the brick wants to be something. So if the Frankenstein of the part-to-whole relationship and each individual parts should be something, as opposed to the, around the lashes of the world where the bricks are the same, then I have a problem. Finally, I want to talk about the last part, which is BS. The name of our office is Bureau Spectacular. It is a very deliberate decision, Bureau Spectacular, because we read this book on bullshit, which, fortunately we were introduced to this book by Michael Speaks, where this book basically only has one thesis. There is a distinction between lying and bullshitting. And the ethical placement of what is, better or worse is that lying requires the truth. Bullshit does not require the truth. Lying is an acknowledgement of fact. Bullshit is the embracement of fiction. And for us to embrace fiction, and for us to think about the multiple realities that fictions can bring, and for us to negate fact is a really liberating beginning, and we want to do it. We want to do it. And to think about, once again, it's not what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Once again, thinking about the perspective or the vanishing point. There are ways of producing representations, for example, the perspective, which if you centralize the vanishing point, it has a really particular agenda. If you put two vanishing points, it produces different sensation, or if you suspend the vanishing point altogether, you get something else altogether. And so for a while, for me, I was attracted to people who suspend the vanishing point. Like these people, like Daniel Libeskind in Micromegas, or Bernard Schumi in Manhattan Transcript. I was really attracted to that for a while. And I think now we're going to try to deal with this vanishing point in a different way. But for a while, I was trying to draw drawings and move on from comic books to do things that are flat, distinctly flat, and make collages that make statements about other projects. For example, this is the Eames house. Or this is the Slow house, or this is the Farnsworth house. And, but I guess before all of that, I was making comics about architecture and urbanism. And to really rapidly conclude this train of thought, I'll tell maybe 3 or 4 stories. Here we have a story about skyscrapers, and the question is, how high can we go? Right now we're here with Burj Dubai. So people were asking, how high can we go? Where would it be? What would it look like? So in this reality, the highest you can go is when you run out of air, which is roughly 12 kilometers. And so here you can faintly make out the skyline of Manhattan, because this is an extrusion of Central Park for 12 kilometers. And it has capacity for 87 million people, which is roughly the size of Germany. Imagine that, rounding up all Germans. And it reverses the figure-ground relationship of Manhattan. It forces zoning and urbanism and zoning to be thought of in section. It forces also housing typologies to be considered in section that respond to cloud formations. Next, another story here, you have a man who is clearly very friendly and intimate with the building. And he says, it's our secret and no one will find us. And clearly, he's being arrested by 2 cops. And he's saying, why? Is it because I'm fornicating with a building? And they're like, no, because you're fornicating with the wrong building. And they go ahead and tell him what's right and wrong. And so they're saying that they've exhausted every possibility of rights and wrongs, and now there are only 3 patterns: iconography, economy, and morphology. And so he's saying, the cops are saying this thing that you're choosing is not any one of these categories. You're clearly just trying to do something wrong to look smarter, which is really cynical and illegal. But he's saying, well, I'm not guilty because, I'm in love. Even though that's the way it is, that's the way I see it. And the policeman says, you're right, love is innocent and beautiful, and we cannot arrest you, but let's assign a reference number to this unique case so everybody can fornicate with this thing. There are instances of murders, and yeah, I'll just end on this one, where a future person encounters a person from the past, and the person from the past is saying, where are we going to this coordinate where your house used to be? And he's very worried. He's saying, what happened to my house? And the future person says, well, you space warped, and you've been gone for 10,000 years. Your culture no longer exists. And he's saying, I'm an archaeologist, and my anthropological thesis is about the average taste of the early 21st century. And so here you have the average taste of the early 21st century. And he says, I have so many questions for you. First question, was architecture this or that? And he's saying, according to findings of the academy, records of the academy, architecture was this. But the majority of archaeological findings of typologies, architecture was that. So in a Victor Hugo sense of the word, this will kill that. It seems to me that your history really distilled it. There are other stories, but anyway. Okay, well, thank you.